gates to the Silver Oaks estates whispered open, not with a jarring clang but with a silent hydraulic sigh. From behind the wheel of his unmarked sedan, Detective Mike Varga watched them swing inward, revealing a ribbon of perfect black asphalt that wound through a landscape so meticulously curated it felt less like a neighborhood and more like a museum diorama of wealth. Towering, ancient oaks, each probably worth more than his annual salary, stood sentinel over vast lawns that glowed an impossible emerald green, even in the dull light of a late October afternoon. Greenwich, Connecticut. For the world's financial elite, it's more than a zip code, it's a fortress. A place where privacy is purchased, and secrets are the ultimate currency. Here, behind these silent gates, the lives of titans are carefully managed performances. And today, Detective Mike Varga was about to step onto the main stage of one of its most commanding actors. Varga's partner, Detective Lisa Kim, let out a low whistle from the passenger seat. "I think my entire apartment could fit in their guest house," she muttered, nodding toward a structure that looked nothing like any guest house she'd ever seen. "Just remember, we're here for a wellness check," Varga said, his voice a low rumble. "Not to appraise the real estate. Keep it polite, but keep your eyes open." The Croft residence wasn't the largest house on the street, but it was undoubtedly the most severe. A masterpiece of stark modernism, glass, steel, and pale limestone, it seemed to jut out of the hilltop like a geological formation, cold and imposing. There were no warm lights in the windows, no toys on the lawn, no signs of life at all. It was a beautiful, empty shell. Varga pressed the doorbell. It chimed somewhere deep within the house, a single, perfect note. Moments later, the door was opened not by a staff member, but by Julian Croft himself. The man was exactly as he appeared in the financial magazines Varga had hastily scanned that morning. Mid-50s, but preserved with the kind of money that defies age. He wore a charcoal suit that fit him like a second skin, no tie, the collar of his crisp white shirt open. He held a crystal tumbler of amber liquid in one hand. He didn't look annoyed. He looked mildly, condescendingly curious, like a scientist observing a mildly interesting new insect.
"Is there some things I can help you with, detectives?"
he asked, his voice calm and deep, devoid of any discernible accent. It was the voice of a man who was used to being listened to. Varga held up his badge. "Detective Varga, Greenwich PD. This is my partner, Detective Kim. We're following up on a concern for Elena Croft. A wellness check. A flicker of something, impatience? Amusement?" Crossed Julian's face before it was smoothed away. "A wellness check," he repeated, as if tasting the phrase and finding it bland. "I see. Well, as you can see, detectives, my home is quite well." He made no move to invite them in. "The concern is specifically for your wife, sir," Kim added, her tone deliberately polite.
"My wife,"
Julian said, taking a small sip of his drink,
"is well. She is also private. She's an artist, very sensitive to the vibrations of the world. She often finds the noise of this life overwhelming. She retreats to one of our other properties to paint, to recharge."
"Which property would that be, Mr. Croft?" Varga asked. "We'd just like to confirm her safety and close the file."
"Hat would rather defeat the purpose of retreat, wouldn't it, detective?"
Julian's smile was thin and didn't reach his eyes.
"She's an aspen, or perhaps nice. The light is better there for her work. She asked not to be disturbed. I respect her process."
Varga's instincts, honed over 25 years, were screaming. This was too smooth, too rehearsed. The man was a wall of polished marble. "When was the last time you spoke with her, sir?"
"A week ago. She was fine. A little tired, but inspired."
He glanced at his watch, a sleek, complicated piece of platinum on his wrist.
"Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a conference call with Zurich in 5 minutes. The markets wait for no one, not even police."
He began to close the door. The conversation was over. "Mr. Croft," Varga said, stopping the door's movement just an inch from the jamb. "If you could just provide a contact number for our report." Julian's patience finally seemed to wear a micron thin. He looked at Varga, and for the first time, the detective saw a flash of the cold steel beneath the polished surface. "The report will reflect that you spoke to me, and that I assured you my wife is perfectly safe and simply wishes for her privacy to be respected. Good day, detectives." The door clicked shut with a sound of absolute finality. Varga and Kim stood there for a moment on the vast, empty stoop. The only sound was the sigh of the wind through the immaculate trees. "Well," Kim said, turning back toward the car. "He's a charmer." Varga didn't answer. He was staring at the house, at its blank, impenetrable windows. "He never asked what the concern was," Varga said quietly. "A husband hears the police are at his door asking about his wife's welfare. His first question is, what's wrong? His first instinct is worry. His wasn't. Back at the station, the case file was a study in frustration. Varga sat at his desk, the name Elena Croft written at the top of a mostly blank page. Social security number? Nothing. Credit history? Zilch. It was as if she popped into existence the day she married Julian Croft. Her entire world was funded by him, funneled through him. Her charity, the Elena Croft Foundation. All the board members were his business associates. Her public photos? Blurry from a distance. It was the perfect illusion. The phrase he used, it stuck with me. "You're chasing a shadow, detective." It's almost as if she never existed. He said it like he was proud of it. A week later, unable to let it go, Vargas secured a limited warrant based on exceptional circumstances and potential risk to an individual. The returning officers reported the same eerie feeling. Residence is sterile. Subject's private quarters show minimal signs of habitation. Closet contains clothing, all high-end, most with tags still attached. No personal effects observed on vanity surfaces. No photographs. The entire area has a strong scent of chemical cleaners. The only forensic evidence they collected was a single, long strand of dark hair, recovered from the drain of her private bathroom sink. It was a fragile thread, but it was something. They bagged it, labeled it, and sent it to the state lab. With no DNA from Elena to compare it to, it was a dead end. The case was officially cold, relegated to a back drawer. A story of a missing woman who might not have ever been there at all. Until the phone rang, and a detective in Pennsylvania started talking about a trash bag, a bone saw, and the distinct smell of lavender bleach. The rain had turned the Stroudsburg, Pennsylvania rest stop into a dismal, gray tableau. It wasn't a gentle rain, but a cold, relentless drizzle that seeped into collars and made the world smell of wet asphalt and diesel fumes. For sanitation worker Leo Brody, it was just another miserable Tuesday on the route. His rig, a groaning behemoth of compacting hydraulics, was parked beside a row of overflowing dumpsters, its mechanical jaw ready to devour another load of society's refuse. Leo was running behind schedule. He jammed the control lever, and the machinery whined to life, the massive plate beginning to crush the contents of the dumpster. He was half-listening to a crackling classic rock station when he heard it, a wet, thick, tearing sound that was wrong. It wasn't the crunch of cardboard or the pop of plastic. It was heavier, organic. A moment later, a dark, viscous fluid, thicker than water and tinged with a coppery, foul sweetness that cut through the rain, began to seep from the seams of the compactor and drip onto the asphalt. "Ah, hell," Leo muttered, killing the engine. Probably some restaurant dumping spoiled meat. Again, he grabbed a flashlight and peered into the hopper. Among the shredded bags and garbage, one bag had ruptured. It was a heavy-duty black contractor bag, the kind you bought at a hardware store, not the flimsy grocery store kind. And it was leaking that same dark fluid. Cursing, Leo hooked the bag with a grabber tool to pull it out for a separate disposal. It was unbelievably heavy. As he dragged it, the tear widened. The beam of his flashlight caught what was inside not as a mass of spoiled meat, but as something horrifyingly anatomical. A curve of pale skin. The stark, white arc of a severed rib. The dreadful, unmistakable shape of a human hip bone. Leo Brody stumbled back, dropping the grabber, his breakfast rising in his throat. He fumbled for his radio, his hands shaking so badly he nearly dropped it. "Dispatch, this is Unit 7 at the I-84 eastbound rest stop. You need to send police. Now. Oh God. I think there's a body in the trash." Narrator VO. November 5th. What began as a routine day for a sanitation worker became the first crack in Julian Croft's perfect world. The discovery at that rain-soaked Pennsylvania rest stop would ignite a multi-state manhunt and expose a brutality so calculated it would stun seasoned investigators. Within the hour, the rest stop was transformed into a swirling vortex of red and blue lights. Pennsylvania state troopers had cordoned off the area with crime scene tape, which flapped wildly in the wet wind. The atmosphere was tense, quiet, punctuated only by the squelch of boots and the low murmur of radios. The lead investigator, Trooper Marcus Evans, a man with a weathered face and the calm demeanor of someone who'd seen too much, stood under a pop-up tent, staring at the unopened bag. The smell was already attracting flies. Trooper Evans, interview. You get a call for a body in a dumpster. You prepare for the worst. But this was different. The bag itself was a clue, professional grade. And the weight, it was just a portion of a body. We knew right then we weren't dealing with a dump job. We were dealing with a disposal. Under the harsh glare of forensic lights, an evidence technician carefully slit the bag open. The collective intake of breath from the responders was audible. Inside was the partial torso of a female, severed cleanly at the waist and just below the shoulders. The arms and head were missing. Forensic pathologist, Dr. Arisha Khan, interview. The dissection was clinical. The cuts were made with tremendous force and precision, through bone and tissue, with a single-minded purpose. This wasn't a frenzied attack. This was a deliberate, cold-blooded act of disassembly. A power tool, most likely a reciprocating saw or a specialized bone saw. And look here. Video, close-up evidence photo of the severed tissue, highlighted by a pointer. Dr. Khan VO. See the pallor of the tissue? There's almost no lividity, no pooling of blood. This victim was drained of blood post-mortem. That's not typical. That's a step someone takes to reduce mess, to make a body easier to handle and transport. It speaks to a chilling level of premeditation. But the most telling clue wasn't visual, it was olfactory. Even over the cloying scent of decay and garbage, a distinct, almost pleasant aroma lingered on the plastic and the skin. Trooper Evans, interview. It was weird. It smelled clean. Like lavender and something else, something sharp. Ozone maybe. Like a fancy hotel lobby. Dr. Khan nodded, sniffing the air carefully. It's a bleach. A specific kind. Industrial strength, but with a proprietary scent marker. I've only encountered it once before, at a crime scene involving a sanitized pharmaceutical lab. The remains were carefully transported to the morgue. The DNA was a priority. Samples were taken, rushed to the lab, and uploaded to the Combined DNA Index System, CODIS, the national database of convicted offenders and arrestees. The team waited, hoping for a quick hit, a name to put to this horrific tragedy. The result came back hours later. No match found. The woman was a Jane Doe. Back at the rest stop, the forensic team continued its meticulous work. They vacuumed the area around the dumpster, searching for any trace evidence the perpetrator might have dropped. They found a few insignificant fibers, a cigarette butt, which would later be traced to a truck driver unrelated to the crime. And then, something more promising. We were processing the inside of the dumpster itself. The liner was stained, but in one area, there was a smudge, a partial print in what we believed was the same residue on the body. It was a boot print. Large, size 11 or 12. The tread was distinctive, a deep, aggressive lug pattern. We made a cast. It was a solid clue. A boot print and a unique brand of bleach. It was something to work with. Trooper Evans issued a bolo, be on the lookout, to surrounding states, describing the MO, dismemberment using a power tool, possible use of industrial lavender-scented bleach. He had no way of knowing that nearly 200 miles away, in Greenwich, Connecticut, a detective named Mike Varga, staring at a near-empty file folder, was about to receive an automated email from the CODIS system. A keyword flag had been tripped. The term lavender bleach from Trooper Evans's preliminary report had been cross-referenced with another recent case file. The missing socialite, Elena Croft. Varga's phone rang. It was the lab. The lab tech was excited. The hair we found in the drain? They'd managed to get a DNA profile from the follicle. It was a long shot, but they ran it through CODIS. It got a hit. A partial match to an unknown female sample entered by the Pennsylvania State Police. The system flagged it as a potential familial match, likely the same person. Varga felt a cold certainty settle in his gut. The wellness check, the sanitized house, Julian Croft's smug dismissal. It wasn't just a missing person case anymore. He called Trooper Evans in Pennsylvania. The two detectives, separated by state lines, compared notes over the phone. The sterile crime scene in Greenwich. The clinically dissected body in Pennsylvania. The lavender bleach. Your guy, this Julian Croft. He's got money, means, access to high-end cleaning supplies, and a missing wife. And he told me she never existed. There was a long silence on the line. Well, detective, I'd say part of her definitely does. The hunt for the rest of Elena Croft had begun. They just didn't know that the next piece was already waiting, hidden in the deep woods of New York, slowly being covered by falling autumn leaves. The silence of the Catskill woods was a living thing, broken only by the crunch of leaves underfoot and the distant cry of a hawk. For Arthur Bell, a retired mailman who now spent his days hunting these familiar ridges, it was a soothing symphony. His old Labrador, Gus, crashed through the undergrowth ahead of him, nose to the ground, tail wagging with a simple, pure joy. It was Gus's change in behavior that first caught Arthur's attention. The easy lope was gone, replaced by a stiff-legged, intent posture. A low, continuous growl rumbled from the dog's chest, a sound Arthur had only heard once before, when they'd stumbled upon a bear cub. Gus was fixated on a large, hollowed-out log, half hidden by a thicket of ferns and recently fallen branches. "Gus, what you got, boy?" Arthur called, his voice unnaturally loud in the stillness. The dog didn't turn. He stood his ground, barking sharply now, a high, urgent sound of alarm. Cautiously, Arthur moved closer, his hunting rifle held at a ready port arms. He used the barrel to push the ferns aside. Behind the log was a package, clumsily wrapped in a thick, dark green plastic tarp. It was about the size of a large suitcase. It hadn't been there last week. A cold knot of dread tightened in Arthur's stomach. City folk sometimes dumped trash out here, old appliances, construction debris. But this was wrapped, deliberately. "Come on, Gus, leave it," he said, trying to sound firm. But the dog wouldn't budge. Arthur hooked the tip of his rifle barrel under a fold of the tarp and tugged. The plastic was stiff, but a corner came loose. The smell that hit him was faint, masked by the pine and the earth, but unmistakable. It was the sweet, cloying, rotten smell of death, undercut by a bizarrely clean floral note. Lavender. His heart hammering against his ribs. Arthur Bell fumbled for the satellite phone he carried for emergencies. His fingers were numb, clumsy. November 12th. 1 week after the discovery in Pennsylvania, the case took a grim, predictable turn. What Arthur Bell found in those New York woods confirmed the investigators' darkest suspicions. They were hunting a predator with a meticulous, gruesome pattern. The scene in New York was a mirror image of the one in Pennsylvania, albeit with a different backdrop. The quiet woods were now alive with the chatter of police radios and the flash of lights from state police vehicles. The tarp was carefully removed by a forensic team in full biohazard gear. Inside were 2 legs, severed cleanly at the mid-thigh. They were wrapped in the same type of heavy-duty black contractor bag. The same clinical precision was evident in the cuts. The same faint scent of lavender bleach clung to the plastic. It was a dump site, not a kill site. The body parts had been transported here. The way the tarp was wrapped was hasty, sloppy even, compared to the cuts themselves. It was like the dismemberment was the important part, done with care. The disposal was an afterthought, an unpleasant chore. The DNA samples were rushed to the lab. The match was confirmed within hours. The legs belonged to the same Jane Doe found in Pennsylvania. A conference call was hastily arranged, linking detectives in Connecticut, Pennsylvania, and New York. In a secure video room in Greenwich, Detective Varga and now FBI Special Agent Lisa Morris, who had been formally assigned to the case, listened to the updates. The boot print we found is from a brand called Trailbreaker. Common enough, but the specific lug pattern is from their X-Trek model. We're pulling sales records from surrounding states. No boot prints here. Ground was too soft. But we did find something else. On the inside of the tarp, a single strand of a different synthetic fiber. Blue, very fine. Almost like something from a moving blanket or furniture pad. A moving blanket? That tracks. You'd need something to absorb fluid during the process. The bleach is our best lead. We've identified it. It's called Ether Clean. It's not sold in stores. It's a subscription-based service for high-end homes and businesses. They deliver the concentrate in proprietary bottles. The scent is a signature. We're getting a warrant for their client list. The pieces were starting to form a picture, and the picture was pointing squarely toward a world of wealth and privilege, toward a man like Julian Croft. It was time to have another conversation with him. This time, the stakes were infinitely higher. Julian Croft did not come to the station. He insisted they meet at his office at Croft Capital Management in downtown Manhattan. It was a power move, a reminder of who controlled the terrain. His office was a corner suite on the 50th floor, with breathtaking, dizzying views of the New York skyline. He sat behind a vast desk of polished obsidian, looking utterly unperturbed. He didn't offer them a seat. "Detective Varga," Julian said, his tone cool. "And you've brought a friend. To what do I owe the pleasure this time? Have you located my wife's retreat?" Varga let Agent Morris take the lead. She was cooler, more analytical. "Mr. Croft, we're now part of a multi-jurisdictional task force investigating a homicide. Human remains have been found in Pennsylvania and New York." Julian's eyebrow arched slightly. "A tragedy. But again, I failed to see the connection to me." "The remains belong to a female," Morris continued, her eyes locked on his. "The method of disposal involves a specific, high-end cleaning product. Ether Clean." For the first time, a crack appeared. It wasn't a flinch or a gasp. It was a subtle tightening around his eyes, a microscopic freezing of his posture. He recovered in a nanosecond. "As I believe I mentioned to Detective Varga, I have a service that handles that. I don't micromanage their choice of supplies. We also have a witness who places a vehicle matching the description of one of your company cars near the Pennsylvania disposal site on the night in question," Varga said, bluffing slightly to gauge his reaction. Julian's smile was thin and dismissive. "I have a fleet of cars, Detective, and many employees. If you have a specific accusation, I suggest you make it. Otherwise, you're wasting my time with fishing expeditions." He picked up a Mont-Blanc pen from his desk. "My lawyer will be in touch regarding the continued harassment." The meeting was over. They had been dismissed again. But as they rode the silent elevator down, Varga looked at Morris. "You saw it, right?" he asked. Morris nodded, her face grim. "Oh, I saw it. He knew the name Ether Clean. The second you said it. He's in this. Deep." They had rattled him. Now they had to prove it. The race was on to find the next piece of the puzzle before he could cover his tracks any further. And the next piece, they feared, could be anywhere. The wind that swept across the Taunton, Massachusetts landfill didn't whisper. It howled, carrying with it a particulate stench of decay, chemicals, and rot so profound it felt like a physical blow. Special Agent Lisa Morris tightened the seal of her N95 respirator, the plastic squeaking against her skin. Around her, a small army of FBI evidence response technicians, state troopers, and local deputies, all encased in bulky white Tyvek suits, looked like astronauts on a hostile, garbage-strewn planet. Narrator VO. November 18th. The investigation had led them here, to this wasteland on the outskirts of Taunton. A place where society's discards came to rest in mountains of forgotten refuse. It was the least likely of crime scenes, and the most daunting. They were searching for a needle in a haystack the size of a city, a haystack that actively fought back against the search. The decision to search the landfill was a calculated, expensive gamble. The trash truck that serviced the Croft Estates route had dumped its load here in Cell 7, a designated section now covered by a week's worth of other garbage. The profile suggested a killer using varied disposal methods to avoid a pattern. If Julian Croft was responsible, he might have used the most obvious route of all, his own trash. The odds were 1,000,000 to 1. We were operating on a hunch, a theory. But when you're up against a wall, you chase the hunches. The cost was astronomical: overtime, equipment, hazardous duty pay. If we came up empty, it was a very public, very expensive failure. The process was methodical, brutal, and soul-destroying. A tracked excavator, its bucket claw fitted with special grapples, carefully peeled back layers of compacted garbage from the designated area. The material was then spread across a grid of tarps laid out on a relatively flat area. Then our job started. We'd form a line, on our knees, and we'd sift, handful by handful. You're looking for a specific type of black plastic bag, but everything is covered in, well, everything. Coffee grounds, diapers, oil, you name it. The smell gets in your hair, your clothes, your soul. You go home, and you can't get it out. They worked in shifts, their progress measured in inches. Days bled together under the cold, gray sky. Morale plummeted. Jokes died in their throats. The sheer scale of the task was overwhelming. On the afternoon of the 5th day, a young, recently minted FBI agent named Ben Carter was on the line. His eyes were glazed over with fatigue, his movements robotic. He was sifting through a particularly vile clump of wet paper and food waste when his gloved fingers brushed against something smooth and hard. He almost dismissed it. It felt like a piece of plastic or a stone, but something made him stop. He carefully pulled it free. It was a tooth, a human molar with a distinct, old-school silver amalgam filling. His heart leapt into his throat. "Over here," he yelled, his voice cracking with a mixture of excitement and revulsion. "I've got something." The team supervisor hurried over. Agent Morris was radioed, and she slogged across the muck to their position. Carter was white as a sheet, but his eyes were blazing. He was holding this tooth like it was the Holy Grail. And right next to where he found it, caught on a jagged piece of a broken picture frame, was a shredded piece of black plastic. And nestled against it, a crumpled, stained piece of paper. The paper was carefully placed in an evidence bag. Back at the mobile command post, a forensic document examiner went to work on it. It was a receipt, torn and stained by moisture and organic matter. The ink was smeared, but under alternate light sources and spectral analysis, they began to pull information from it. It was a FedEx receipt. The shipping address was largely obliterated, but we could make out which CT and the first few digits of the zip code. The recipient address was a total loss. But the account number, that was key. It was partially visible. We traced it to a corporate account belonging to Croft Capital Management. It was the first tangible, physical link connecting the disposal site directly to Julian Croft's world. The tooth was rushed to the FBI lab in Quantico. The filling was unique. It was their best chance at an identification. But they needed more. They needed to place him at the scene. The rental car lead had gone cold. The shell company was a dead end. They needed to get back into his house, and this time, they needed to look not for a body, but for the evidence of the act itself. The warrant was easy to get now. A judge signed off on it within an hour of being presented with the landfill evidence. This time, they weren't just looking for signs of Elena, they were looking for signs of a massacre. The team descended on the Croft mansion again. Julian was present, silent and seething, his lawyer at his side. He watched them with cold, contemptuous eyes as they brought in UV lights, chemical reagents, and toolkits. The place was still a forensic vacuum. It was cleaner than a surgical theater. We were getting nowhere. We were about to pack it in when Agent Morris pointed at the kitchen sink. Not the counter, the sink, specifically the drain. A technician produced a set of tools and began to unscrew the U-bend pipe under the massive stainless steel sink. He pulled it free, a curved section of pipe, and held it over an evidence tray. A sludgy, foul-looking gunk oozed out. Everyone focuses on the surfaces. The smart ones remember the drains. You can bleach a surface to perfection, but stuff gets caught in the pipes. Grease, hair, food particles, and hopefully a whole lot more. They took the entire garbage disposal unit as well. Back at the lab, they subjected the disgusting sludge to a painstaking analysis. They found food particles, soap residue, and several more long, dark hairs. And then something else. Under the microscope, we found microscopic particles embedded in the grease. They were jagged, sharp. We did an elemental analysis. Calcium and phosphorus, the primary components of bone and tooth enamel. They were a match to the composition of the molar found in the landfill. The DNA from the hairs in the drain was extracted. It was a definitive match to the remains found in 3 states. They had done it. They had proven that Elena Croft, or whoever she was, had not just been in that house, but had been violently dismembered in it. Julian Croft's pristine, sanitized fortress had been the abattoir. They had their victim. They had their crime scene. Now they needed to prove who she truly was, and in doing so, discover why she had to die. The conference room at the FBI's New York field office was a stark contrast to Julian Croft's opulent world. Whiteboards covered in timelines, photos, and forensic reports lined the walls. At the center of it all was a photo of the recovered molar, its silver filling gleaming under the lab lights. Below it was the question haunting every investigator in the room. Who is Jane Doe? They had her DNA. They had proof of her brutal death in Julian Croft's home. But without an identity, without a history, without a life, she remained a ghost. And a ghost made for a fragile case against a man with infinite resources. They had proven how she died. Now they had to prove who she was. To defeat Julian Croft's claim that she never existed, they had to resurrect her. They had to find the woman behind the phantom socialite, and in doing so, find the motive for her murder. The DNA from the victim had been run through CODIS, the database for criminals and arrestees. It had failed. The next, more complex step was to use forensic genetic genealogy. This involved uploading the DNA profile to public genetic databases like GEDmatch, which are used by civilians to find relatives and build family trees. It was a long shot, a digital fishing expedition in a sea of millions of profiles. It's like getting a single piece of a 1,000-piece jigsaw puzzle. You have this tiny fragment of code, and you're trying to find other pieces in a vast, unrelated pile that share enough similarities to start building a picture. It's painstaking, and it requires a lot of luck. For 72 hours, the genealogist worked, algorithms comparing the victim's DNA against public profiles, looking for shared segments of chromosomes that indicated a familial relationship. Finally, the system pinged. A hit. We got a 98% probability of a first cousin match. A woman named Maria Flores, living in Hartford, Connecticut. It was the break we needed. Detective Varga and Agent Morris drove to Hartford, to a modest but well-kept apartment building a world away from Greenwich. Maria Flores answered the door, a woman in her 40s with kind, tired eyes and her hands dusted with flour. She was baking.
Can I help you?
Ms. Flores? I'm Detective Varga. This is Agent Morris. We'd like to talk to you about a family matter. May we come in? Inside, the apartment was warm and smelled of cinnamon. Photos of family covered the walls. Varga's eyes scanned them, looking for a familiar face. We're trying to identify a woman. We have reason to believe she may be related to you. A cousin, perhaps. He showed her a digitally aged photo, an artist's composite based on the skull structure of the remains. Maria's polite curiosity turned to confusion, then to dawning horror. Her hand flew to her mouth.
Dios mío, that looks like my cousin. Sophia Flores. But she's been gone for years. We thought she was just living her life.
When was the last time you spoke to her, Maria?
5 years ago. Maybe a little more. She called me. She was crying. She said she'd met this man, a powerful man. He was sweeping her off her feet, but it was too fast, too intense. He wanted to change everything about her. Her name, her look. He even talked about fixing her teeth. She said he told her, "Your past is a liability. Sophia Flores is dead. Now, you will be Elena."
The story poured out of her. Sophia Flores, a beautiful, ambitious girl from a working-class Hartford family, who moved to New York to be a model. She'd met Julian Croft at a nightclub. He was charming, wealthy, and obsessive. He isolated her from her family, telling them she was ashamed of her roots. He created a new identity for her, Elena Croft, the mysterious socialite.
She called me that last time. She was so scared. She said he had a temper, that he controlled everything she did, everyone she saw. She said he had this phrase, "You only exist because I allow it." She wanted to leave, but she was terrified. She said, "He'll never let me go. He'd rather see me dead than with someone else." I begged her to come home. She said she'd try. I never heard from her again. We thought she just didn't want to know us anymore. She broke down, sobbing. The grief was not new. It was the reopening of an old, confused wound. The investigators had their name. Sophia Flores. They had their motive, control, and they had a witness to Julian Croft's threatening behavior. The next piece of the puzzle fell into place at the Hartford Public Records Office. A request for a death certificate for Sophia Flores had been filed 5 years ago, shortly after Maria's last phone call with her cousin. The cause of death was listed as a drug overdose. The certificate was signed by a doctor who had, conveniently, retired to Costa Rica. The signature was a forgery.
He didn't just kill her. He tried to kill her twice. First, he murdered Sophia Flores and replaced her with his creation, Elena. Then, when he decided to dispose of Elena, he tried to erase her completely, relying on the fake death certificate he'd forged years earlier to cover his tracks. He was playing a long, sick game. But Sophia Flores was fighting back from the grave. With her real name, they could find her real records. They found an old dentist in the Bronx who remembered a beautiful young model with a memorable silver filling. He still had her x-rays, stored on a dusty hard drive. The FBI couriered them to Quantico. We superimposed the x-ray from the Bronx over a scan of the molar found in the landfill. It was a perfect, unequivocal match. The root structure, the filling's unique shape and placement, there was no doubt. Jane Doe was Sophia Flores. They had done it. They had given the victim back her name. They had proven, beyond any legal or metaphysical doubt, that she had existed. Armed with the testimony of Maria Flores, the fraudulent death certificate, and the dental match, a judge signed an arrest warrant for Julian Croft. The charge, murder in the first degree. This time, they wouldn't be asking him questions. This time, they would be ending his performance for good. The arrest warrant for Julian Croft was a piece of paper, but in the hands of the FBI, it was a seismic charge, about to detonate the carefully ordered world of a billionaire. The plan was not to kick his door down. It was to let him walk into a trap of his own making, to let him believe he was still in control until the very last second. They had her name. They had his motive. Now they needed irrefutable proof that placed Julian Croft at the center of the horror. They needed to connect him directly to the acts of disposal, to prove he was the architect of Sophia Flores' gruesome journey across 3 states. The investigation split into 2 focus tracks. The first, led by Agent Morris, was digital. They obtained a new warrant for Julian's electronic life, his phones, his computers, his cloud servers, and the logs from his home's sophisticated security system. The second track, led by Detective Varga, was physical and painstaking. They knew the Trailbreaker extract boot print from Pennsylvania was a size 12. They knew Julian Croft wore a size 11.5 custom loafer. The boot wasn't his, but someone had worn it. They began the arduous process of subpoenaing payroll records from Croft Capital Management and the security contractor that serviced his home, looking for any employee who fit that shoe size and had access. Meanwhile, in a digital forensics lab, technicians combed through the archived security footage from the Croft estate's gates for the nights of the disposals. The night of the Pennsylvania disposal, his main gate camera shows his Mercedes leaving at 6:15 p.m. and returning at 1:30 a.m. A tight alibi, but we noticed a blind spot. A 3-minute gap in the coverage of the service entrance, triggered by a scheduled system reboot every night at 6:20 p.m. It was a vulnerability a man like him would know about. They cross-referenced traffic camera footage from a main artery 2 blocks from his house. At 6:22 p.m., a common, dark gray Ford Fusion was recorded leaving the area. It was a rental. They tracked its path north onto I-95, then I-84, its easy pass recorded at the Stroudsburg, Pennsylvania exit at 8:47 p.m. The timeline was perfect. The rental was under a shell corporation, another dead end. But we pulled the full rental agreement. The customer had to sign a digital pad at the counter. The signature was an illegible scrawl, but the email address used for the receipt, it was a string of numbers and letters. We'd seen it before. It was the password to her encrypted, partitioned section of Julian's private cloud server. He'd been sloppy. He'd used a digital fingerprint. He'd rented that car. It was a direct link. But they needed more. They needed to place the boot on his foot, or on the foot of his proxy. Back at the Croft estate, a second forensic team executed a new warrant, this time focusing on the garage, the utility rooms, and any outbuildings. In a locked storage closet adjacent to the garage, behind a stack of landscaping tools, they found it. It was a single size 12 Trailbreaker X-Trek boot, caked in dried mud. It looked brand new except for the sole. And next to it, still in its box, was a professional-grade reciprocating saw. The brand was Pro-Cut, a high-end, industrial tool not available at regular hardware stores. The boot and the saw were seized and sent to the FBI lab. The mud on the boot was analyzed. The soil composition was a match to the area around the dumpster at the Stroudsburg rest stop. Inside the boot, forensic technicians found a few microscopic flakes of skin. The DNA was a match to Julian Croft. The saw was pristine. It had been meticulously cleaned, but we took it apart. In the motor housing, in the tiny gaps around the blade clamp, we found what we were looking for: microscopic particles of bone and tissue. The DNA was a match to Sophia Flores. Julian Croft, the man who wore custom-made suits, had gotten his hands dirty. He had done it himself. The net was now drawn tight. They had him on video renting the car. They had his DNA in the boot that left the print at the dumpster. They had Sophia's DNA on the murder weapon stored in his house. They had the fraudulent death certificate. They had the testimony of her cousin. The order was given. It was time to arrest Julian Croft. They didn't do it at dawn. They did it at 10:15 a.m. on a Tuesday, in the middle of his workday, at the Soaring Glass headquarters of Croft Capital Management. It was a public spectacle designed to shatter his invincibility. The perp walk was a media frenzy. Cameras flashed, reporters shouted questions. Julian Croft, in a $10,000 suit, his hands cuffed behind his back, was led out of his temple of finance. His face was a stone mask of arrogant contempt, but his eyes, for the first time, held a flicker of cold, real fear. The performance was over. The truth had finally caught up. He was processed, fingerprinted, and placed in a holding cell. He uttered only 2 words to his lawyer, who had appeared within minutes: no comment. The following day, at his arraignment, the charges were read aloud in a packed courtroom. Murder in the first degree, desecration of human remains, tampering with evidence. The prosecutor requested no bail, citing his extreme wealth and flight risk. The judge agreed. Julian Croft was remanded into custody, led away in an orange jumpsuit. As he passed the gallery, his eyes met those of Detective Mike Varga. There was no apology, no remorse. Only a look of pure, undiluted hatred. They had their man. But the final battle, the trial, was yet to come. And Julian Croft had one last, desperate card to play.